In the last Unpivot video, we used Power Query to unpivot some football data. Power Query made this quick and reliable. What if you don't want to leave the worksheet? Or maybe you're not comfortable in Power Query yet? Or perhaps you want your updates to be live without clicking anything. In Excel 365, we can achieve the same outcome using dynamic array formulas. Let me show you how. So here we've got 3 teams and we've got the number of goals they've scored per month. However, what I'd like to get to using formulas is I'd like to get to this unpivoted view where we've got all our teams, all our months and all our goals in 3 distinct columns. So let's start building that up. For this task, we're going to use the MAKEARRAY function. This is one of Excel's dynamic array functions. So we're going to start typing make, and then I'm going to press tab on MAKEARRAY. Now this function simply needs a number of rows, a number of columns, and how you want to treat those rows and columns, and it will output a grid. So if we picture our unpivoted data is going to be 3 rows for each team for Jan, 3 rows for each team for February, so it'll be 3 times 7 because we've got 3 teams and 7 months. So we could type 3 times 7 for our rows. Our columns, if you picture back to the output we were looking for, was teams, months and goals, so 3 columns. So we could type 3 there. And then our function is going to be a LAMBDA, which allows us to create our own function. So we're going to start by typing LAMBDA. And now the MAKEARRAY function passes 2 parameters into a LAMBDA nested within inside it. And that is the rows and the columns results. So we need to give those parameter names. The simplest thing you can do here, you can use anything you like, but an easy one to remember is use R to denote rows and C to denote columns. Then we step into further parameters or calculations within our LAMBDA, and we can simply say, what do we want to do with the results of those rows and columns? And just so we can see how this is starting to build up, I'm just going to put R and C to concatenate the results of those 2 variables. So if I close parenthesis on the LAMBDA and then close parenthesis on the MAKEARRAY, let's see how we're looking. So we've correctly got 3 times 7, i.e. 21 rows. We've got 3 columns, so that part's working great. However, to get that, we hard typed 3 times 7 for the rows. So how could we sort that? Well, what we could do is we could nest here the rows function. So if I start typing rows, go down to rows, you can see what this does. It returns a number of rows in a reference or array. So we're just going to reference this array and then close our parenthesis on that. Then when I highlight that, you can see the result of that is 3. So we've dynamically got our 3 there. However, if our table grows with another team, that will become 4 and 5 and so on. So we'll get a dynamic result of the right number of rows we want there. Now, if you remember, we did that times the number of columns. So we can do the exact same principle. We're going to do times and then start typing columns. And you can see columns has got the exact same function as we've used for rows, except it counts the number of columns in an array. So press tab, and then I'm going to highlight from January to July. So those are the month columns we want. However, you can see the problem here is we've hard coded Jan to July into there. If we were to add another column outside of that range, i.e. before Jan or after July, it wouldn't automatically be included. So a simple way around that is if we go to team and all the way to July, you can see we're just referencing our headers of our table, which means it doesn't matter how many headers we get, they'll automatically be included. So I'm going to close parenthesis. However, that's going to give us 8 because we've got 8 columns like so. So we're just going to add on -1 there. And what that's saying is our table will be made up of any number of months, but there'll always be 1 column for teams, and therefore we don't want that unpivoted. so -1. I'm just going to add a parenthesis before our columns function and after our -1, so that all gets correctly applied. And then if I highlight from the rows to the end of the columns function, we can see the result is 21. 3 rows times 7 columns. So next step, we hard-coded 3 columns. That's always going to be the same result, so it doesn't matter about that. We just want the teams, the goals and the months. And now let's move on to working on this lambda function. I'm just going to tweak this slightly to help with the visuals and explaining. So instead of pulling R and C, I'm just going to show you the row output for now. So we're just going to pull R in our lambda. Now what you'll see here is we've still got our 3-column array by 21 rows. However, each row has the same repeating row argument because that's all we've applied in our lambda. So everything on row 1 has got row 1 and everything on row 9 has got row 9. And then if we have a look at what the column parameter is passing through into the lambda, you can now see everything in column 1 has got 1, everything in column 2 has got 2, and everything in 3, 3. So how can we replace these R and C values with what we actually need or want this to be doing? So for our calculation, we're going to do some nested ifs here. So I'm just going to press Alt and Enter to go down a row so that we can do some separation. And then I'm going to say if our column result, or C, the parameter, is equal to 1, so i.e. are we working with the first column in our array, our result is going to be true or false. I'm just going to close parenthesis on the if and then the lambda and the MAKEARRAY. Now you can see that we've got trues and falses, so where we've got C equal to 1 or column, we're getting true, the other 2 are false. So now we've got that, let's continue building up our formula. I'm just going to change that true to be the text team for now to help. And then I'm going to press enter, you can see that's all team. Let's work on the rest of the formula. So I'm just going to press Alt and enter to go to the next row. We're going to do another if. And we're going to say if C is equal to 2, then we want it to be month, otherwise false. So let's see how we're looking now. We've got month in column 2. Then we're going to press Alt and enter again, and we're going to say otherwise it's equal to goals. And I'm going to delete the false element. So now when we enter that, we've got a simple set of nested ifs within our MAKEARRAY lambda. And now what we need to do is work out how we can get the right teams, the right month, and the right goals. Okay, for the team section, we're going to use an index. And we're going to index our teams, and the row number that we're going to provide into that index is we're going to use a mod function. Now I'll break this down in a second, but the mod is going to be R, so our parameter R, -1, and then the divisor is going to be the number of rows within our teams. I'm going to close that, I'm going to close our mod, and then I'm just going to add 1 on, and let's have a look at the results. So you can see here, we've got Man City, Liverpool, Arsenal as our first 3, and then we've got it repeated a second time, a third time, and so on, all the way down to the bottom. So just to help bring that to life, I've put a sequence in here of 1 to 21, just so we can see the 21 rows as numbers. And then to the side, I've done the same process of mod of that row number. I've took off 1, and then the divisor is 21 rows in total, and then we've added 1 on. And you can see the output of that just gives us simply 1 to 21, which we pass through into our index to give us our team position within that index. We're going to use a similar process for the months, except we're going to use the integer function instead of mod. We're going to get rid of month, and we're going to start to build up that index, where we're going to index, and this time instead of the team names, we're going to index the column headers. Our rows argument, we're going to begin with INT for integer. Then we're going to use the row number -1, similar to what we did with the mod. And we're going to divide that by the number of rows in our data, i.e. 3. I'm going to close our parenthesis on that, and then we're going to +1 on again, and then close our parenthesis on our index. Now you can see we've correctly got 3 sets of Jan for the 3 teams, 3 sets of Feb, 3 sets of March, April, May and June. So we've got the months correctly labelled up now. I'm going to get rid of the goals. So we're going to index, and this time we're going to index where our goals are. So we're going to select that data set. And then for our rows argument within our index, we're going to do a mod. And within that mod, we're going to do R-1 again, similar to what we did up in our team index. And we're going to use the rows feature again, and we're going to do exactly the same to work out how many rows are in our table. Then we're going to close that row argument off. So notice this element is an exact duplicate of what we used up here. For the columns argument, we're going to use this integer that we used here. So I'm just going to copy this. I'm going to paste it into the columns section, and then we're going to press enter. Just missed off a +1 in that rows argument. Just going to add that on. Now you can see we've got all the goals added, and that completes our unpivot action. So let's test it out. If we were to go to Liverpool for May, we should be seeing 12. So let's find Liverpool, May, we've got 12, great. If we would go to Arsenal for February, we should see 16. Arsenal, February, 16. And then we could do one simple check of how many goals are here, 231. If we sum up this array, 231. So that all looks to be working nicely. So we've used a make array, we've nested in some helper rows and column counters, and then we've used a lambda with some nested ifs, and then we've used index principles mixed in with mod and integers to help us find our rows and columns. So there we have it, another way to unpivot data. Compared to Power Query, the dynamic spill array formulas give you instant updates, but they're harder to set up and maintain. In the next episode, we'll take this one step further and have a look at solutions using Python for Excel or Visual Basics macros. I hope you enjoyed it. Please press that subscribe button so you can keep up to date with my weekly videos. Hit that like button if you found that useful, and I'll see you again next week. Thanks for watching.